Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the episode 11, part two with Conversations with a Feathered Serpent, and I am your host, Kat. This episode primarily focuses on the biomancy protocols, which is something very near and dear to the heart of the feathered serpent. This will help heal the planet, this specifically. So it's a very special episode. Again, welcome. And don't forget to engage with us, leave comments, ask questions, and we will definitely get to them in further conversations. Without further ado, let's just jump right in and welcome back the feathered serpent.
So this is the R&D section of the Harmony Project webpage, and
Right.
this is research and development, something that I'm particularly fond of because this is my reason for being here. Is I'm writing the Biomancy protocols. This will be available when it's complete, but it will be a complete book on the protocols on how to train and to enact these protocols. So let's talk a little bit about biomancy. Well, Latin, of course, and you have necromancy, and necromancy literally means information from the dead. Traditionally, this would be things like Ouija boards and speaking with the dead. There's plenty of movies that talk about this. Necromancers are people who get information from the dead. Seances, this kind of thing, that's all necromancy. So the alternative to necromancy is information from living systems and information from life. And how can you have a healthy environment and healthy community and even a healthy individual if there's not communication between all the members? Your own body has trillions of separate cells divided into three broad categories. There's a third human, a third bacterial, and a third fungal. And essentially, they're all communicating in a symphony. When this community or communication breaks down, this is when you have dis-ease. And cancer, for example, is a cell that is not singing in harmony with the symphony. And the cure for cancer involves retraining that cell to sing in harmony with the rest of the choir members. We'll get into that at a later date. So essentially, here, we're just reading from the webpage, biomancy is the art, craft, science, and the reason that is expressed that way is because there's not one word in English that expresses this concept of art, craft, science. And really, this isn't just about science. It's an art, it's a craft, and it's also a set of protocols. It's all three of these things of symbiotically shaping, communicating with life in order to create a harmonious environment. Everything right now is communicating in an Eden web, just humanity is cut off from that because of our brainwashing. And if people want to see people that are tapping into that, I suggest looking at a wonderful animal communicator named Anna Breitenbrock from South Africa. There's many YouTube videos regarding her, and an especially impressive one is where she communicates with this Black Panther, actually achieve something miraculous. And I'll let people watch that on their own. But she is the beginning of a return to what we used to be able to do all the time. And tribal societies knew this. Everything's living, everything's talking, everything's communicating. I have a book downstairs in my library where it's the cutting edge research on trees. And guess what they're finding out? Trees are constantly talking to one another through fungal network that actually bridges their roots, and this symbiotic fungus actually helps send messages between the tree roots, and they actually coordinate to do things like support a weak in the community. We'll discuss things like potential threats. They're talking all the time, and in fact, everything's talking all the time. Just can't hear them. So aware that this is the case and retuning into that Gaia web, important. Achieving a harmonious on Earth with all the other living things on the planet, which is the raison d'etre of the Harmony projects. In addition to the shaman's intuitive ability to speak with plant animal consciousness, biomancy uses quantum holograms, remote viewing techniques, scientific procedure, and permaculture principles to provide a holistic set of protocols with which to systematically communicate, symbiotically shape other living things in a way which is beneficial to both. Now, how can we shape things? Well, that's Rupert Sheldrake's work on morphogenic fields. See, Darwin was, again, a lost leader. He was meant to distract and distort. And if you think that the way things are created on Earth is through random natural selection, and then mother has like offspring and one of them has longer legs, so that one runs faster and that one catches more meat, and so that one breeds more and that one eventually becomes, is not the way things are formed on Earth. I suggest you read carefully all of Rupert Sheldrake's work on morphogenic fields, because that is the way things are shaped. Things are shaped through energy fields, and that affects DNA, and then the DNA is changed. And in fact, they've done experiments. Bruce Lipton talked about an experiment where a researcher was trying to prove the supremacy of genes. And they did a research project where they put a bacterium in a petri dish which contained nothing but lactic acid, and the bacterium could not digest lactic acid. So they thought that because it was genetically unable to digest lactic acid, that after a week they would look in the petri dishes and all the bacteria would be dead. Well, imagine their surprise when they came back a week later and the bacteria was thriving. So when they more or less autopsied it and put it through a CRISPR, do the gene sequencing, they found that some of the junk DNA that they thought didn't do anything actually contained a component to rewrite the DNA in order to the organism to continue. So why and how did that happen? Well, obviously the bacteria didn't want to die, right? And so it rewrote its own genetic code to be able to eat lactic acid. This was published in Nature magazine, and of course, quickly hushed because this is not what certain forces want people to be aware of. So what I mean about using quantum holograms? Well, quantum holograms is connected to remote viewing, but essentially a quantum hologram is you're in a deep alpha theta state, you can visualize into the morphogenic field. That visualization becomes a quantum hologram. And it's essentially an energy blueprint, is a way to look at it. So since all life form is communicating through an energetic field, morphogenic field, and the way it's constructing itself, like a mother knows that going to be a harder winter, well, she communicates that through her energy field to her DNA that comes out through her next offspring, and the next offspring's body is slightly adapted to new conditions. And this is the truth. Life on planet Earth are all shapeshifters. We're all shape-shifting over time. If you were to see the dinosaurs turn into birds, if you were to see at the level that planets perceive time, it would be like a few hours and all of a sudden dinosaurs became birds. Well, that wasn't because of random natural selection. That was because of a conscious interaction and morphogenic fields giving each generation a new blueprint and a new blueprint to operate through. So I suggest reading Rupert Sheldrake's work on morphogenic fields. Now, full disclosure, he's considered a high scientific heretic, but since when has the masses ever been right about anything? You look at Galileo, went against the crowd. All discoveries are the people out on the fringe of the main. So I can guarantee you that Rupert Sheldrake's work is cutting edge material that should be learned at kindergarten. Okay, that's actually how things operate. And it explains a lot. It explains how nature coordinates, how starlings fly in a flock, how things seem to have this in a jungle, this chaotic conflict, but yet actually overall it's a giant harmonious symphony. So Rupert Sheldrake's work on morphogenic fields will help explain the scientific basis for this whole project. Viewing techniques. Well, why remote viewing? Because remote viewing is protocols on how to get the consciousness out of the body. And that's important when you're sharing space and communicating with other life forms. You have to get out of your centric viewpoint. So people can look at remote viewing protocols. Okay. Scientific procedure simply means to encode the procedures. So that's all I mean by scientific procedures. Okay. I don't mean using scientific dogma. I simply mean to codify the procedures so it's not this random, accidental approach every time it's done. Okay. Permaculture principles, because, well, I consider permaculture to be very foundational regarding how to interface with natural systems. So Bill Mollison's work on permaculture is extraordinary, in my opinion, and allows us to create a much more healthy environment. When I mean a holistic set of protocols, holistic means, that is um, rigid, okay, flexible. This is a ongoing research project, and it will be growing and enhancing as many people contribute to it, refining over the years. To systematically communicate and symbiotically shape. Symbiotically, this is an important concept. What's the difference between parasitic and symbiosis? Well, symbiosis, you have many things living in your body that aren't human, such as the bacterium and fungus, that are symbiotic with you, which means they're giving as much as they're taking. Whereas a parasite simply takes to the detriment of the host, a symbiote actually gives to the host something as well as something. So when you're saying symbiotically shaping, you're saying that you're not just creating because a human wants it, but you're actually having a conversation with something in order to create an agreement. And that's what symbiotically shaping means.
Right, like with plants to produce in specific, yes.
And in fact, like this is obviously done with fruit. Communicated with the plant that a great way to spread your seeds around is if you made a succulent, nutritious substance and embedded your seeds in that, and then I would eat it and then poop your seeds out somewhere else over there. Now, that's an example of a symbiotic agreement, right? Like one is getting something from the deal. Okay. It's just a way of creating the understanding that this isn't about telling something to do something.
Right.
This is about asking and involving another sentient creature in a dialogue. Okay. It was a bit, which was beneficial to both.
Right.
And taking this approach gives humanity the ability to be like fishes. You notice that sharks don't attack animals that help them. Those little birds that clean up insects on, the rhinoceroses don't try to shoo them away. Sharks that lay there and wait for the cleaner fish to pick their teeth and get rid of parasites. So if humanity realized that by being cleaner fishes to the rest of the ecosystem, everywhere we went, we'd be welcome, because everywhere we went, we'd be making other life forms better and enhancing other life forms' existence. And they know this, and be happy to see a human rather than running in fear when they see a human. No, that's a long way to go from now, but start somewhere. Example would be shaping, molding through telepathy, communicating, merging consciousnesses, a tree that would hold a house like the forest elves in Lord of the Rings. This is an extreme example, and I'll add to that the Avatar tree in the Avatar. Is an extreme example which shows it could take many lifetimes of concerted effort by many people to ask a tree to shape itself in the form needed. In fact, the look of the elves in the Lord of the Rings is a good example of the concept working. In this context, a city would look like a forest. And there's a quote from Buckminster Fuller, genius again, somebody who should be taught in elementary school. And this quote says, "We're all heading for the aesthetics of the invisible. It is when our technology becomes invisible to nature and nature invisible to it, will we have achieved the ultimate." Buckminster Fuller, page 200, Design Outlaws, which is a great documentary, by the way. I watched Design Outlaws. I have the transcript. I have the book that goes along with it, and it's work. One of the main tenets of biomancy is that consciousness is independent of form. Therefore, if we acknowledge the consciousness of the life we share our planet with, we can form the foundations of a cooperative relationship rather than an exploitive, destructive, enslaving, objectifying relationship we have with most life forms on the planet. Okay, now this says a lot in a short amount of words, but if you unpack it and think about it, one might start to go down a very interesting rabbit hole, which is, why does humanity enslave things? Perhaps that's because subconsciously we know we're being enslaved. So we're the only creatures on the planet that domesticate. Domesticate is defined as developmental and social retardation. So we domesticate other life forms. We don't symbiotically cooperate with them. Okay. We this perhaps because subconsciously, perhaps we know we're being domesticated, and we need to reverse this. And the biomancy protocols hopefully will be a part of that. Consciousness is independent of form. This is important. Just because something looks like a shrub or a plant doesn't mean it doesn't have a very big consciousness. If you ask most shamans, specifically, if you look at most work where people in the 70s were going down to the Amazon and finding shamans that were curing all diseases, and they're like, well, how do you do this? How do you learn how to mix all these potions together? Because they're thinking allopathically, like they must have tried like combinations before they hit upon the right combinations of this root, and then you chew it up that way, and then you add that plant, and you create a cure for this ailment. And Western trained allopathic mind was that they must have went through millions of combinations or thousands of combinations before they hit on the right combination. But that didn't happen because, of course, what tribe would put up with a shaman that was like on people and just saying, hey, I wonder what happens when we throw this in. Oh, look, Fred died. Well, you don't think many people would want you to be the shaman anymore. Okay. True to this point is that when they went and asked the shamans, well, so what did you do? How did you figure this out? The shaman said, well, I went and took some psychedelics, which are important for getting the consciousness outside of the mind or outside of the body. And remember, people, this isn't scripted. So that's why there's these little Mercury retrograde hiccups. It's all just free form consciousness. Okay. So me some slack. So anyway, point being is that they go do some hallucinogens. In the case of Amazonian shamans, it's ayahuasca, and they would go and lay under the plant they want to ask a question of. And that plant would show them a disease and show them how to mix it and how to prepare it and give that to them in a vision. So there was no experimenting. They just
The
followed
Not the disease, but the medicine, you mean?
plant that they
Yeah.
would sleep under or meditate under while they were doing ayahuasca would give them a vision on how to cure the particular ailment and how.
Right. Yeah.
There was no experimenting. They would just essentially follow directions.
Yeah.
That came from the plant.
Right.
So I was doing some training with a First Nation shaman named Blue Thunder, and I gave him a traditional gift of tobacco. And I said I felt bad about doing it because tobacco kills so many people in Canada. And he said, why do you say that? And I said, well, it kills 100,000 people a year. He said, no, that's what you white people did to it. He said, we did it for 50,000 years. It didn't kill anybody. And he said, tobacco is a very powerful medicinal teacher. You just don't know how to talk to it yet. Now, that wasn't something that my Western brain wanted to hear because my family had been, by cigarette smoking, and I was very ardent against tobacco. But he turned out to be completely correct. And when you can free yourself from these preconceptions that we receive in Western culture, you find that there are very many vast consciousnesses out there that don't have human form. Okay. It doesn't mean that we are superior because we have two legs and two arms.
Right.
I reject any religious or spiritual teaching which puts humanity on top of the pyramid because it's simply not true. And by the way, you watch that Anna Breitenbach about the Black Panther that is named Spirit. Well, she says that he's actually a very old soul and he's actually a very significant consciousness. And again, this is about recognizing that consciousness isn't linked to your shape or form.
Right.
Okay. We've been brainwashed that because we have two arms and two legs, we're somehow special and we're above everything. We're on top of the pyramid. We're the chosen of the creator. And I got to break it to you that that's not the case. Okay. You're not the most advanced form of consciousness. Many souls come down and choose other forms to experience reality in. This is discussing that. Is independent of form. Therefore, if we acknowledge the consciousness of the life we share our planet with, we can form the foundations of a cooperative relationship rather than the exploitive, destructive, enslaving, objectifying relationships we have with most life forms on the planet. Now, for example, that doesn't mean I say we should only eat plants. As I've said to many vegetarians, plants have consciousness too, and they don't want to be eaten any more than an animal does. Okay. It would be something like if you had a farm and you had cows and you'd be using the cows to fertilize your fields through their droppings, etc. Well, you would wait until that cow died naturally before you would consume it. Okay. It would be communicating and talking to it and asking it what it wants to be happy. Okay. I visited Damanhur, by the way, and Damanhur's done a lot of work with plant consciousness.
Mhm.
Went there to find the gentleman who did the chip that allows them to uh, plants to sing and make music. And on the last day I was there, I met the gentleman. His name is Chameleon, and he was out there soldering some electronics under a little tent. And I approached him, and before I got to where his work table was, this little plant on like a remote controlled car, but it was hooked up to the plant. The plant was actually driving the remote control car that its pot sat on, and it came out rolling out, and it came around me, and then like it went around me and then followed me back as I was walking back to Chameleon. And I was a bit nervous, I was going to introduce myself, and he was very warm and friendly right away. And when I was stammering and stuttering about what to say, he said, "Oh, don't worry." He said, "That's my guardian plant, and he's already checked you out. And I don't talk to anybody he doesn't like, but he likes you. So you're a good person." And this is just an example of what can happen when we realize that we have a whole entire world full of consciousness around us that we can speak and talk to and interact with. Okay. Biomancy protocols are going to be do that, or hopefully start the process of how to do that. Example, instead of a steel bridge, it's possible to communicate with coral and ask it to build a bridge out of coral. You can also do this with a tree, which they do in Indonesia. They shape living trees to actually bridge rivers, and they shape the tree so it's still living, and then they guide the branches and make railings, and it's all done with a living tree. Okay. Also able to communicate the abilities needed, like the bridge must be able to hold X amount of weight and let the coral gestalt mind intuitively develop the form needed. And this is done through morphogenic fields and quantum holograms. Example would be communicating with carpenter ants and termites to carve and shape wood to form for a variety of purposes. This is just a beginning and therefore an incomplete work, the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. And there will be a book coming out about this in the not too distant future. Uh, those interested. And also, we'll be holding classes on how to do that at the Harmony Project locations. So you can see that if you combine a community that understands how to build structures that create harmonious energy, how to have communication with life forms around it, that this is a whole different level of interacting with on the planet. Okay, so some of the other projects we're working on in Madagascar, we're developing this right now, alternative protein sources. And this was well before the World Economic Forum began trying to shove this down people's throats, is alternative protein sources. Now, I discovered this when I was looking at what the Aztecs ate, and it turned out that 70% of the Aztec protein sources were from insects. And the reason is insect protein is a far superior form of protein. Um, if you think about it, what does the largest life form on our planet eat? It eats the smallest. So the blue whale, the largest life form on our planet, eats krill, which is the smallest life form on our planet. Perhaps we wouldn't have to eat as many ungulates if we had proper, healthy insect protein sources. And that doesn't mean cricket flour. And there's criticisms, for example, that say, "Oh, well, insects are, when you eat these things, you get these parasites." Well, not all insects, they're dummy. Okay, some insects. So, for example, there have been cultures that have been eating spiders and scorpions. If you think about it, what is a crab or a lobster or shrimp for that matter? It's all the
Mhm.
same thing. Okay, this one travel person came from Britain, went to the Amazon, and they cooked him up a special feast, and was very large tarantulas, and they tied him up like a cow, threw him on the fire, burnt their hair off, and then gave him a leg, and he was really squeamish. And the guy said, "This is a delicacy. You worked all day to get this, and this would be a big insult. So you got to at least try it." So he tried it, and he was pleasantly surprised because it tasted like crab. Okay. The simple concept is, what's easier on the environment? A cow farm where you've got to chop down the forest and have a huge cow herd, or an insect farm? The answer is obvious, right? So anyway, this is, remember, research. It's not a conclusive discussion. It's not the end all be all. People are free to disagree with this. It's fine. Alternative business models. We are interested in developing economic paradigms which will allow commerce, which benefits the planet by healing and contributing in a benign manner. I believe a lot of the economic models are designed to be enslaving and And we want to show people that it's possible to have different models. Suggestions for our R&D. We welcome any and all suggestions into areas of research. 2 brains are better than 1, 3 are better than 2, etc. You get the idea. You don't participate, you only have yourself to blame, because then you'll just be listening to me. So hope everybody starts chiming in. I hope this creates dialogue, conversation, a discussion, a debate, lively debate where people are passionately arguing different viewpoints is always desired, because an argument isn't always bad. A discussion isn't always bad. A passionate discussion isn't always bad. Sometimes that's how the greatest discoveries happen and come about, is when people are different viewpoints, discussing it.
Yeah.
So services, next one. Um, Basically, these are the services we offer currently. We hope to be expanding this as more people join the project. YouTube algorithm, people to subscribe and put content. This is all about knowing that there's real people and not about a legion of Chinese or European bots creating a false perception that something has a lot of participation.
Right.
So remember, be lively in the comment section.
Right.
People, if you don't communicate and interact, you have only yourself to blame when it turns into a single person narrative.
Right.
Okay. There's a whole bunch of quotes here, and then there's opportunities, term work study, skilled craft people needed, investments, real world testing for experimental free energy technology, which is a whole other topic. Services, willing to trade, barter, long term apprenticeships, getting more in detail into all these subject matters. As if you're a scientist, artist with or without a degree, because universities don't have a license on genius. So I don't give a flying what the fuck you have a degree or not. But if you consider yourself a scientist or an artist and would like to contribute, please contact us. We are looking to combine all fields into R&D cells to start mixing things up and seeing what solutions are created. And this comes from a study in the Black Forest in Germany, where the University of Stuttgart created a multidisciplinary school. And this is going to be at the heart of hopefully most of our intentionally designed communities, is a multidisciplinary school. They found that when physicists, chemists, engineers, carpenters, welders are all sitting down having lunch together, there is this cross-pollination of things that ideas and concepts that just isn't possible when everybody keeps to their own. And so in the University of Stuttgart, they have this multidisciplinary institute in the Black Forest, and they were able to create a very, very thin membrane, which is ridiculously thin, but yet holds huge amounts of weight. And that's because there was a biologist talking to a physicist, talking to an engineer, talking to a carpenter, talking to a welder, and they were all sharing their ideas. That is when you get the best ideas coming forward. So ideally, at the heart of these communities will be multidisciplinary schools where you have a bunch of different disciplines all communicating. And one design we have is a Schauberger funnel, a building like a Schauberger funnel inverted, and then that will be like a tower. And then you will have strangler figs growing around that outside. And we have drawings of this, by the way. And then these strangler figs grow together to form basically a super tree. And then the human mind actually creates the linkages inside the super tree so that the geometry is designed to be in geodesic dome triangles, etc. Instead of the tree randomly creating these linkages, we would consciously create them. And there's actually people in Germany doing this right now, building a living house out of a bunch of tree species that can merge. Then you would have a vortex at the top, which sends water vortex down through the center of all the classrooms, and that would disperse laterally clockwise rotated water vortex, which would disperse life-enhancing fields laterally throughout the classrooms. And that would be at the center of a community, for example. So you'd have this huge avatar tree and a school inside of it, and it would be a multidisciplinary study, and that would be the hub of a community. One example. So yeah, and Star Trek Science Fund, well, that's a little bit of a lost leader, not necessary now. Before this was all created, had a concept, because as an inventor and a scientist, I was restricted by what I could develop based on money. So this is long before crowdfunding came around. So I figured out that, hey, if every Star Trek fan in the world put $1 instead of towards which can't do anything, if they put $1 a year towards a science fund, maybe we could pay these scientists that have free energy solutions, et cetera, that aren't being funded by universities to actually create this stuff. We went fairly far with it, point where we actually had a team beginning to build this out, and then crowdfunding happened. So, but if you just think about it, if you got 1 million people to donate $100 a year, how much money is that?
Right.
Okay. And then you would get out from under the governments and people like that. So really, it was just a concept of how people could empower their own visions and dreams
Right.
rather than being beholden to an organization or a bank or a government.
And that essentially is why we're creating the Harmony
Yes,
Project.
yes, yeah,
I think it's a great place to leave for today in this
yeah.
conversation. And then, yeah, in time we'll start really diving deep in some of these concepts and just spend like conversation on like concept kind of thing. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, and remember, everyone, it's Mercury retrograde, so it seems a little bit jaggy around the edges. Well, we're all human, right? So,
Okay, well, thank you again for another great conversation, and we'll look forward to next time.
okay.